For some, it's been about staying at home. For other people, perhaps a change in your life or your finances or your jobs. But for some people and for others, it's been about life and death. Hi, everybody. I'm Benita Adams, and today we will talk to two people who COVID-19 affected their lives from that category. One is a survivor of COVID-19, another a caretaker of COVID-19. How is it going where you live? We'll talk about that next on Blazing Hot 91. Welcome, everybody, to Hampton Roads Voices. We are so pleased to be here today. And also, we're going to be talking, even though some of the phases have changed in some of the cities, we know that it is hot summer weather and some people are going out and about, but we still have to take COVID-19 very seriously. So today I have two people out of Chicago who will be talking about how COVID-19 has affected them. It's a very important conversation, and I thank you for being with us. So we have two people today. I happen to know them well. The first is Uris Bates, and the second guest is Zelene Kelly Bates. Hi, you two. Thank you for being here. Wonderful.
It's our pleasure.
Okay, good. So I will start because I always want our listeners to know who they're listening to. Uris, if you'll first start with yourself, just the brief biography of who you are, what you do, and then we'll start to get into COVID-19. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Uris Bates. I'm in advertising, sales, TV, radio production. Been doing it for some time now, and been around for a little while. And I'm married to Zelene Kelly Bates, who is my wife, and she's a media pro and everything else. And I'll let her introduce herself.
Wonderful. Z, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Right now, my first and foremost role is caretaker to my dear husband of almost 29 years. But I am in advertising. I've been doing media planning and buying for, I'm not supposed to say the years anymore, a long time. And I have upgraded myself to a engagement specialist, not because there's no longer just traditional media. There's all kinds of media out there. So I think I'd freshen up who I was.
That is true. I did read an article about if you thought it was rather difficult to get a job after 50 pre-COVID, now it's even harder if you're after 50. So you do have to change what you say. Take all those dates off the resume and stuff. 1975. Nobody cares anymore. So
right.
Absolutely. So let's start. Uris, I want you to start with, of course, you are our survivor, and Z, you're a caretaker, and we know it gets mushed together a bit because you are married. But Uris, tell us a little bit about what led you to know that you had COVID, or what led you to the hospital or the emergency room. What was going on?
Well, I guess I've been watching and listening to the news a lot, and I know that we were doing some traveling to Arizona, and then I actually went to a little family gathering, and I just wasn't feeling right. So I had quarantined myself for about a week.
Mm-hmm.
And in my bedroom, and I didn't even let my wife come in. She dropped my food off at the bedroom door and everything. But then I started feeling, I guess I wasn't feeling right, but I remember calling my daughter and said, "Do you think I should go to the hospital?"
And then she said, yes, of course, and you were to go to the hospital. Now, Z, did you, obviously he was quarantined, but what did you see that made you say, yeah, we need to get there. We need to get to the hospital. Something must have changed.
He had been quarantined for a week, and I just really had expected him just to get better. And so it wasn't until he actually called me and said, "You call 911."
Wow. Okay, so that was the major thing, him knowing that it's beyond serious now. We've got to get there. So Uris, what were some of your symptoms? We read about those kinds of things, but tell us firsthand, what were your symptoms? Was it the respiratory problems? Was it a headache? Was it a cough? What was going on in your body?
Well, I had like a dry cough, and then just wasn't, so I was sleeping a lot. I had a slight headache. But still, it wasn't that too bad. But my eating habits had changed, so I wasn't doing anything. I was sleeping a lot as well, and just trying to stay away from people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to affect my house.
Right.
In so many words.
Yeah, he also had a fever. I mean, he had a fever, then it would go away, and then it would go, come back. So he couldn't quite regulate that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I see that. So Z, is this the case? You are not allowed in the hospital? I know we hear those stories, but maybe they don't seem real. You couldn't be there, right?
No, and when he called me and told me to call 911, I knew it had to be serious because he knew that I would not be able to go to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, so when we called 911, they came, but he was able to physically walk down the steps and get into the ambulance. But I really believed that they were going to take his vitals, and tell him to go on back upstairs and get better. I did.
Okay.
But once they started working on him, they closed the doors and drove off. They didn't even say, we're taking him to whatever hospital. They just left immediately and took him to the hospital, and I didn't see him for 5 weeks.
Wow. And was it thinking, I'm asking that because sometimes we live in a world, we say, that couldn't happen to me. That happens to other people. I'm not one this is going to happen and this is going to happen. Were you in that mindset or you were just in, getting my husband better mindset?
Well, I wanted to know what was going on. I didn't want them. I wanted them to do whatever they needed to do, but I wanted them to call me to let me know so that, between yours and I, we could together make a decision. When he first went there, he was on oxygen and he had pneumonia, but he wasn't on a ventilator. And so I clearly, based on watching the news and hearing different things, I really thought that he'd be home in a week, he'd be home in 2 weeks or so. They would call and say there's a possibility that he might have to go on a ventilator, and I got my prayer warriors together, and that didn't happen. But after 3 weeks and thinking that he'd be home soon, he ended up having to go on the ventilator. So I was confused. I was disappointed. And at some point I got a little worried.
Yeah. Now what were you thinking? Were you aware of, especially when you got to the hospital, were you aware of, okay, sir, we're going to have to do this. And then now you have this, or now we're going to put you on the ventilator. Were you aware of everything, or were you somewhat unconscious of everything that was going on?
Well, first of all, I was just sitting in the emergency room, and I thought, to be frank, I thought, I don't mind. I stay in the hospital for a day or two. That give me a chance to relax and be away from home. But yet, I didn't know. I thought that I was going to be home in a few days. So I didn't even know I had pneumonia. They didn't tell me I had pneumonia. I found a lot of symptoms from Doreen when I actually came home 5 weeks, 6 weeks later. I had pneumonia. And then I didn't realize that.
Oh, so when it's like that, were you able to speak for yourself, or did the hospital staff have to get on the phone with Z and said, can you approve this? We're going to have to do that. Was it anything like that, or you were able to just make your own medical decisions at that time?
No, not actually, because they were just like, even I never been on dialysis before. They never said, get permission, can we put you on dialysis? Let me call your wife. All I know is next day they said, well, we're going to put you on dialysis. That's 24/7.
Yeah, but the doctors would call me and tell me what was going on. The one thing that they were, that's a symptom of COVID, are blood clots. So they told me that he was on a heparin drip, and that was for the entire 5 weeks he was there. He was on a heparin drip so that there would be no clots that would go to his heart. But he was also on oxygen or on the ventilator, one of the two, and then he was required to take dialysis for his kidneys. Because the virus gets in the body and it just goes wherever, and it affected his kidneys, it affected his lungs because he had pneumonia, and it affected his heart. Yeah. In fact, the day that they had to put him on the ventilator, they called me and they said, we're going to have to put your husband on a ventilator. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. By this time, we had 3 other instances where they did other treatments, and it prevented him from having to do the ventilator, but they finally had to do it. But when the doctor called back after they put the ventilator in, he said, "Great bedside manner. I have some bad news and some good news." He said, "The bad news is that while we were putting the ventilator in, your husband's heart stopped."
Wow.
The good news is we got it started again. Well, I was, needless to say, devastated by that. And then because his heart stopped, and I didn't think at that moment to ask how long his heart had stopped, they said, and we won't know for 48 hours how it has affected his brain.
Wow.
So they didn't know if he'd be able to walk, think, remember, because of this. But thank God, after less than 24 hours, they saw signs that he was able to hear and think and respond, and he got better.
Yours, go ahead.
But a lot of this, it happened in stages, because when I first was admitted to the hospital, I was acting, I knew what was going on. I was just had a string oxygen across my nose. Mm-hmm. I was alert and everything else, but then as time progressed, it was like 2 or 3 weeks when I started getting worse. They would transfer me from one emergency intensive care to a more intensified intensive care. So it was like working in stages, because even before I was put on the ventilator, they came in the room and put like this big bubble over my head. I was just breathing in oxygen in this big bubble. They said, "If this doesn't work, we're going to have to ventilate you." But I said, before you ventilate me, one thing, just call my wife.
Right.
You ventilate.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that was it. I didn't know anything else. I thought the bubble had worked because the bubble was gone, but I didn't know that I had a heart attack. I was gone for 16 minutes. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know. I thought I was all right because of the bubble.
Yeah, and that's so critical that you say that for our listeners, yours, because to say it's in phases. I did not know it came in phases. Perhaps it happens the same way. Everything happens at one time, and that's what I thought. But it's important that you say first this, then this, then this. It got progressively more serious. And so that's critical for our listeners to know. So right now, listeners, thank you for being with us. We're talking to Uris Bates. He is a COVID-19 survivor, and his wife, Zelene Kelly Bates, is his caretaker, and we're talking about COVID-19, how it has affected, a real life story, a real life example of how it affects us. What has it done? What situation have you found yourself in? So Z, when the doctor said, "Here's the good news," here's some bad news, and here's some good news. Once, I would imagine, but I want you to tell us, once he said that his heart had stopped or had died, and then it went into that moment, do you remember when you thought, oh my goodness, if there was a space where the doctor breathed so he could tell you the good news, what was, like, wait there. What was going on? What was going on once you just heard that?
Well, I have to tell you, there were a couple of times when they told me that he might have to go on the ventilator, and certainly when they told me that his heart stopped, I would get physically ill. I would start to shake, and I would start to sort of hyperventilate, and I had 2 friends that I would call. I had prayer warriors, so I had lots of people that I kind of kept up with, meaning I'd send out texts about what was happening with my husband. But when I got sick, meaning I got tired and afraid, there were 2 people that called because I said, well, I don't want to be in my house dead.
Right.
I want you to know that I'm sick, and if I don't call you back in an hour, because it would take me about an hour just to kind of calm down, get my breathing under control, stop shaking, and kind of hold on, continue to hold on. It would take me about an hour. And that's kind of how I got through those rough times. I got to tell you, in the beginning, I just thought he would be there a while. The longer he was there, the more I had to tell myself, he may not make it, and I said, I can't fall apart. I have a family. and I have to tell them. But I all along told my daughter and son, I would let them know. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I really let them know just how sick he was, and that it could go either way. So I did have to accept that. But that was very frightening for me.
And it has to be, because I think when all of us, this all started, March, schools started closing down, all those kinds of things, maybe we thought that, oh, yeah, I'd be there for a minute. I'll be out of work for a minute. I'll be out of school for a minute. Then we'll all get back, get these masks off our faces, and just get back to playing pickleball or anything like that. So, yeah, absolutely. So it is important for people to understand, of course, that this could be the long haul. And you were saying yourself in terms of you're thinking you're getting ready to go back home after a little bit of time, and all of a sudden it was one thing after another. So as you went through each phase of seriousness of COVID-19, do you remember what you were thinking or how you were processing it at that time?
In fact, I didn't think I was that sick, but they would come in and take my vitals, and I keep laying in the intensive care, and nothing wasn't happening. I was like, I've been here for a week now. I think I'm ready to go home.
Like, okay, guys, I've had enough. I'm done. I'm going to go home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's time to go. But at the same time, too, my mother, my sister, as well as my niece, they got infected as well. So they was in the hospital. So I'm like, what's going on? And I can't talk to anyone. And sometimes I couldn't call home because I got weaker and weaker as the same progress. I got weaker. I couldn't talk. It took a lot for me to even roll on my side and everything. So, and I had to get used to actually a person taking care of me. Because they took care of me. Mm-hmm. They did everything for me. And that's what happened. I had to actually person had to take care of me.
And that must be difficult. I've had many shows about African American men or just men in general and virility and strength. And my job is to take care of everybody else. And yet it happens to many people that you are in the reverse role, that now you have to be taken care of instead of somebody you have to be taken care of instead of you taking care of somebody else. What was that like? It just as a man, what was that like? Were you angry? Were you no, don't take care of me. No, I got this. What were you thinking?
The way I tried, but one of the heartbreakers was that I never thought I'd have someone who actually had to wipe my behind and stuff. That's how bad it was. I couldn't do anything.
Wow.
So it was heartbreaking, but yet I had a good nurse, and I depended on him. He came in and he took care of me.
Now,
everyone else took care of me, even I never realized. I was so happy when the nurse said, "Do you want me to give you a bath?" I said, "Yeah." And I'm thinking I'm gonna get some water on me. Yet they had these package of wipes and stuff that they lay you in and wash you my legs and my arms and everything else. But at least I was clean. But that was a true experience that I actually had to have. I never thought that I would be in a situation like that where someone had to actually do everything for me. I mean, that was a trial.
And that's challenging for any of us. We can drive ourselves. It's almost like your parents when they get older and you say we're going to have a nurse or give me your car keys. You can no longer drive yourself safely. So it is a tough situation to be in. So Z, I'm going to kind of ask you the same question. What was it like to go from your husband who is virile and lively and funny and barbecues all the time to I'm going to need help up the steps, or I'm going to need help go to the bathroom, I'm going to need help doing this? What was going through your head and heart at that time?
When he finally got to the point where he tested twice negative for the virus, and they said he could come home. Well, they asked me. They said, "Would you like him to go to a rehab center, or would you like him to come home?"
Benita, I'm learning something every day. I didn't know they wanted to send me to a rehab. I didn't know none of this. A lot of stuff. I didn't know what was going on with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I like I told you 29 years ago, I signed a piece of paper that said, "For better or for worse," I said, "Send my husband home."
Wow.
I said, whatever it takes. I can handle it. Mm-hmm. And so I ordered porta potty and I ordered pads for the bed. I just got ready to be and I'm not Florence Nightingale by any means, but I just wanted him to be comfortable. I wanted it to be as easy for him as possible. But whatever it took, he needed help getting up. I was there to, I had to do it, and it wasn't a problem. I was glad to do it. Well, I will say this: while Eurus was in the hospital, one of his best friends died of COVID at home. He waited too long. And that's what they were finding out about men, is that they're trying to tough it out.
Yeah.
And this particular guy waited too long. And nobody, because Eurus was sick, people didn't want to tell him. But he was a pretty prominent pastor in Chicago, and I felt like if he had been watching the news, because they did a news report, I thought he would hear it or see it on maybe Facebook, because he had his phone at some point, or television. And so I said, he's a 60-year-old man. He can handle it. He knows about life and death. But people were so afraid to tell him because, he was sick.
And that's so important, because we sometimes it goes both ways. The person who is sick says, I don't want to burden all my family and friends and tell them. And then the person who was going to be the caretaker or whatever says, why didn't you tell me you were that sick? I didn't know you were that sick. I would have changed my life, come to see you, whatever, called you more or something of that nature. And so it's so important to look at that. So Z, I want to ask you, in terms of, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want you to unpack that just a little bit with our listeners. You were saying you had your prayer warriors and you had people, check in on you. How important is a support system for the caretaker? Because people need to know that.
Oh, my goodness. I had several people. I didn't have to go to the grocery store. I basically didn't have to cook. I had one guy that would cook on the weekend, and he cooked me so much food it would last me for the entire week.
Wow.
He would go to the grocery store for me, ring the doorbell, and hang it on the, he didn't, we were doing our social distancing and wearing our masks. I had people from that I work with to order Uber Eats and have food delivered. And that was a blessing, because I didn't feel like cooking. I didn't really have much of an appetite. So it was really nice that people were able to help me out. Like I said, a meal was just a wonderful thing to receive. And you can't do this alone. During the day, I was busy. I was picking up a master's degree, doing work. And I almost had to force myself to stop working, because then it was late, it was dark, it was me, it was the dog, and my mind would go places I didn't want it to go. I would worry. So the nighttime was the worst time. I was living to call the hospital to find out how he was doing. I would call at 6:15 in the morning. I would call at like 1 o'clock in the evening and like 8 o'clock at night. So I was living for my phone calls to find out how yours is doing.
And so, when something happens to somebody else, and a person said, well, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to bother them. But it seems like we all need somebody to check in with us, or us to check in with them. And you don't have to have long conversations. You can just send a text as opposed to a long a phone call or something. But that's what I'm getting, that I think our listeners are as well. You've got to have people that you can depend on. So obviously your husband needed a staff of people and you to take care of him, but you as the caregiver needed some help as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would really tell people, don't be afraid to reach out. I really, every other day, not every day, but every other day, because if I didn't, my phone would ring constantly because people were saying, what can I do? What can I do? So every other day, I did a fairly lengthy text. I told you that he was doing well. He was off a ventilator. He was on a ventilator. I gave enough detail that allowed people who wanted to call. The people wanted information. People wanted to know if they could share other information with other people. So it was comforting to know that people knew and that they were praying very specifically about something that was happening to him. For example, Yours didn't go in the hospital on dialysis, and I wasn't going to believe that he was coming home on dialysis. Mm-hmm. And so I would tell people specific things that if you would just agree with me on, to pray and agree that he would not have to come home being on dialysis, so it helped to be very specific about what my desire was for the health and the healing of my husband.
And that is important because you can say specifically, I need this, this, and this. Now, I don't need that.
Right.
I don't need this over here. That sounds like a good idea. I don't need that, but I do need that.
Ashamed.
Yes.
Be specific about what you need and about what you want.
That's
Absolutely.
right. Mm-hmm. I love that. We only have about 5 minutes left, but let me make sure those who are coming to our show a little bit late. Again, we are talking to Eurus Bates and Zelene Kelly Bates, husband and wife, out of Chicago. Eurus is a COVID-19 survivor, and of course, he's a COVID-19 survivor, and his wife, Zelene Kelly, is a caretaker. Now, Eurus, with a few minutes that we have left, we have about 4 minutes, but what would you say to that person? I love that Zelene said in terms of, don't wait too long. What encouraging words, or what would you say to make people know this is serious? Now, stop playing. This is serious.
Could you say that again? It's like I hear something in the background.
Oh, okay. What would you say to the person who has gone through this, or perhaps will go through it? What would you tell them in terms of how serious it can be, in terms of how you need to take the help from someone else? What would you say to them?
I would tell people they really need to take this virus as serious, and that even after I've gone through it, you can still get it again. Just because you think you done had it before, it's like you have antibodies to fight it off again, because there have been people that had it and survived it, but still yet got it again and passed away. But I say you try to just do what your doctor tell you to do, and just try to stay your distances from people. Mm-hmm. Keep a mask on, but still you got to be sociable. Still you can be sociable, but at a distance, and actually just do what your doctor tell you to do.
Right.
And just do what your doctor tell you to do.
And not, I got this. No way. Z, your last words in terms of being the caregiver. What would you tell the person out there listening today?
That I realized that Eurus progressed so much faster when he came home than I think he ever would have done had he gone to rehab. It might have been easier for me had he gone to rehab, but I think that if at all possible, if you could bring your loved ones home after their hospitalization and not put them in a rehab, they will progress so much faster with the care they can get at home. Now, I do want you to know that when my husband came home, he had a physical therapist that came in twice a week and a nurse that came in twice a week. Mm-hmm. So there is help. So don't hesitate to ask the hospital and the doctors what kind of assistance that you can get to bring your loved one home and help them to recuperate as soon as possible. There's lots of things. We have a breathing machine that he uses because his oxygen still isn't at capacity yet. So there's all kinds of things. You can learn how to use them, and you can be there with your person. There's nothing worse than, having to just talk with them on the phone and through a very, very desperate, dire situation, not being able to see them.
That's right. So we thank you so much for being on our show again, Eurus and Zelene Kelly Bates from Chicago, talking about COVID-19. Thank you, you two, and best wishes as you get stronger and stronger together.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We thank you for being here today for our show. And there's so much that's going on in our personal lives. And really know that, as we say, and you keep hearing it over and over again, we're in this together. Take it seriously. Wash your hands. Wear your mask. Don't let that message get old and say, I've heard it. No, it's serious. And we just heard that example from our guests today. So don't forget that we are at Hot 91 online, also Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate what you do. We will wish you well wishes, of course. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.